welcome to the History Hotline. I am your host, Deanna Lynn Cook, and I have a special guest today, the first guest on the History Hotline. And I think as listeners, you should definitely be honoured to be blessed with the sounds of such a wonderful young woman speaking to you today. Our episode will be about immigration, the history of immigration, how it impacts, people within British society today, and also some really kind of cool things that are happening this Christmas in regards to some charities that are working, to help people that are dealing with immigration and refugees and people like that. But I'm not going to say too much because we're going to let our guest do that. But first, let me introduce her. So she has a first-class degree in linguistics from Queen Mary. She also has an MPhil, in education, globalization, and international development from the University of Cambridge. She is one of the most selfless people I know. She's unapologetically fabulous. She has worked with so many charities and is probably the reason that I was involved with quite a few charities during my time at university with her. She's fundraised, raised awareness for, and got others on board to work with charities such as Copperfield, A21, Bloody Good Period, Restless Development, and Judas Cloud. She also is a very well-travelled and a very cool lady. She spent time working for the Red Cross in Norway, volunteering there, and now volunteers for Mosaic Education, which is what she'll be speaking about a little bit later. And that is a charity that works with organisations in Jordan and Lebanon to help refugees access higher education. So, live in the studio today, socially distanced, well, we're not even in the same room, it's virtual, is our special guest, Hannah Gaffey. Thank you so much for joining me, Hannah. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. We were just talking about earlier how great it is that you have this podcast and that you even did it whilst doing a master's. Because I think some days I couldn't even get out of bed when I was doing my master's. So I don't know how you did it all, and you're still doing it all, but it's great.
It's insane. I feel like pandemic came with blessings and a lot of time. I think I realised how much time I spend just being outside doing very little. When you're kind of forced to be inside, you realise that 24 hours is actually quite a while. So yeah, I feel like I've been, trying to use the time wisely, and I'm just very happy to have you here today.
Well, thank you.
Let's get into this episode. I'm firstly going to just, talk about history because, History Hotline, why not? And I think we're going to firstly talk about kind of history of immigration in this country, and what that has meant for people, and just a kind of precursor to just look at, I would say, kind of how the government uses immigration in order to decide what kinds of people they want in the country at what certain points, and what kind of people they don't want in the country, because immigration acts have allowed people to come to this country, but they've also allowed and restricted who can come in and who needs to leave at any given point. Before I do that, though, I think, do you want to talk about yourself and the work you kind of do, why you do it, and, whether you like it or not, and yeah, that kind of thing?
Thanks. So I recently finished my master's, as Deanna said, in education, globalization, and international development, which is a lot of words, but I specialised and did my dissertation about young people seeking asylum in the UK and their access to education. And I feel like that really came about actually when I was in Norway. I was volunteering for the Red Cross and met lots of young people seeking asylum who they were explaining sort of their quality of life to me, and they said, we can't do anything or go anywhere because... So first of all, for people listening who might not know what an asylum seeker is and what the difference is between an asylum seeker and a refugee, an asylum seeker is somebody who has entered into the process of having their refugee status determined. So they're, fleeing war, conflicts, persecution, and they've arrived in a country and they said, I'm seeking asylum, and then they'll go through an asylum process, and ideally in the UK you should get a decision within 6 months, but as we know, it often takes longer. So sorry for that ramble, but I just thought it's important for people to know what an asylum seeker is, because when I was growing up, there was a lot of talk of, bogus asylum seekers, illegal immigrants, and yeah, the idea of asylum is sometimes conflated with being illegal or being unworthy of humanitarian protection. So I met these young people in Norway, and they were saying, we don't have access to education, we don't have access to the marketplace, like the job market. We basically sit inside all day and do nothing because we have no autonomy over our lives because we haven't been given refugee status, which means that, you know, you can't just go out and be an everyday human. So I found that obviously horrific. But I think what particularly struck me is, as a young person myself at the time, and I still am now, I have, you know, so much autonomy over my life and I can choose to do whatever I want, essentially, especially during that time I was making the decision to go and study a master's. And I was like, you know, these young people don't have the opportunity to do that. Um, so then I was like, right, I'm going to go to Cambridge, I'm going to study education, and I'm going to, you know, solve all these problems, which obviously very big-headed of me and is absolutely not what I'm doing. But yeah, I think it just struck a chord with me because I was like, why, you know, why can't people have access to education? Like, of all things, why can't have people have access to education? So yeah.
No, I think that definitely makes sense. And it's interesting to know the place that, you know, your research was born out of. I think everyone has that moment, especially doing a master's where you're so focused on, you know, your project and you have to be really passionate about it to write about it for so long in such kind of isolation, especially during a pandemic. So yeah, it's good to know where that kind of drive for that research specifically came from, and the fact that, you know, you had experiences with people that were kind of stuck in this situation where they can't do anything. As you said, they don't have autonomy over their kind of daily lives while they wait for these decisions to be made about their lives, or because they are literally fleeing, you know, in some cases death or violence or torture. It's not an ideal situation in any way, and I really do like the work that Mosaic do, you know, in regards to kind of to working with people to change their situations. What kind of made you turn to Mosaic or start volunteering for them?
So I started volunteering for Mosaic in September 2019, I think, and it was just after I'd returned back from Norway and I was about to start my masters at Cambridge. And I actually came across their Instagram profile because the printing company that I used for my Teas for Fees campaign were advertising, like, we want you, you know, we want artists and designers to come up with artwork to put on these t-shirts to sell for this charity called Mosaic Education. And they help refugees get to university. And I was like, this is like an absolutely great charity. Like, how can I get involved? So I think I just
Yeah.
sent them an email and said, like, I really want to get involved. How can I get involved? And they came back to me saying, oh, actually, we're already advertising for a social media volunteer. Um, Basically just put in an application for it, and I was like, great, because I absolutely love social media. So I was like, it
Yeah.
just, you know, when it just feels like the perfect opportunity,
Perfect
because
fit.
you're like,
Yep.
I love like the cause, and then also the actual sort of volunteer role is something that I really enjoy doing, and like activities that I find quite energizing. So then I was like, sign me up, please.
Perfect. Makes complete sense. Absolutely. One thing just to pull out, just in case any audience members aren't aware, what was your Teas for Fees campaign all about? Just briefly, if you could sum up
Just
for me.
it's the hardest thing to say just briefly, but just briefly, it was a campaign to raise money for my master's degree at the University of Cambridge because, as I'm sure people are aware, it's a very expensive education, and a lot of the times you have to self-fund that education. Like, there aren't grants and scholarships available from the university. I think it's something like 89% of Cambridge master's degrees are self-funded, and that doesn't necessarily mean
Wow.
that you're self-funding it. It's that you could get a scholarship from like an external body, but it's that the University of Cambridge aren't going to fund it, if that makes sense.
Definitely.
So yeah, Teas for Fees, we sold t-shirts and tote bags with some of my lovely friends' faces on it, one of them being Deanna. And yeah, we raised money, and that was kind of it.
Absolutely. Perfect, perfect, perfect. Right. So, as I said, we're going to get into a little bit of
Yes, I'm so
history.
excited.
Oh,
This is the
wow.
best bit. It's literally the history hotline. Hit me with it. Let's go.
So, the first time that immigration was kind of brought into law was in 1905 with the Aliens Act, and that was specifically for the Jewish people that were coming from Eastern Europe, and it was a lot of poor Jewish people, and people, I guess the government wanted to stem that because, as we've said, there's a certain type of person that at different times the British government want in their country. And so that was kind of one of the biggest waves of immigration. They were fleeing religious persecution, mostly kind of in Russia and that side of Europe. And so that was the first act that kind of placed a restriction on them. The restrictions were that they needed to have the means to support themselves and any dependents when they arrived. They also had to have a medical inspection when they arrived. They couldn't be, and these are quotes taken from the law, not my own words, please. They could not be a lunatic, an idiot, or diseased. Those are their words, not
Right.
mine at all. But you can obviously understand that they meant like mentally
Mm.
ill. Idiot, I'm not sure. I was going to assume they also mean mental
Yeah.
illness, and disease would be having certain illnesses as well, physical or otherwise, and they couldn't also be sentenced in another country. So they had to be not sentenced in another country, so coming freely, not like running from like prison, basically. So yeah, it was the first point of legislation, and it was also the first legislation on refugees as well, which and it gave individuals the right to asylum in Britain if they were fleeing religious or political persecution. And so yeah, they legislated against who could come in and the type of person that they wanted. It's just the same story. Like Britain and the British government, they're not slick, you know.
Mm-mm.
They just follow the same patterns year on year out. You know, 1905, 2020 now,
Same
they're still
thing.
going. Same
Same
thing,
something,
different day.
different day.
That's the one. Right, so following that, there was the Act in 1914, which is just before World War One started. It was literally rushed through the eve of World War One, and it basically said that all quote unquote aliens had to register with the police before they arrived, when they arrived in Britain, and I think that was just to do with kind of war restrictions and things like that. But it also meant that people were on record, on an official record of being in the country. During the 1930s, European refugees were fleeing the Nazis, especially in Germany. This began as early as 1930. Whilst World War II didn't start till 1939, people actually started coming in really large numbers in the 1930s, especially around 1933. And so during this time, we see mainly people fleeing the Nazis, essentially, but we also see a lot of people being rejected. Britain liked to reject people, and this didn't kind of stop in the time of war, even though it was very clear who they were fleeing and the kind of things that they were
Mm.
fleeing. And Britain had skin in the game because they were essentially fighting this as well. And whilst it is understandable that they couldn't necessarily take in everybody fleeing war, I don't know if it was because maybe there might be German spies that would try and flee as refugees. I don't know what the thinking was, but they didn't, and I think they took in a lot of children. I think it was called the Kinder Transport,
Mm.
where they took in a lot of children. They had a set amount of children that they took in, and America did similar things as well. But yeah, that was kind of during the war. After the war, there was a big, massive growth of Commonwealth immigrants, which, if you've listened to any episode on here before, you will know. 1945, the war ends. There's two ships before the Windrush, the Ormond and the Almanzora, and then in 1948, the Windrush comes. British Nationality Act of 48 means that if you're a citizen of the United Kingdom and the colonies, you're free to come to the country. 1962, this is restricted. I think it's conservative governments at the time, but by the way, these immigration laws are in no means like limited to one government, the right or the left. Labour and the
Mm-hmm.
Conservatives have both had their hand in immigration laws, in the hostile immigration environment that we see in the 21st century. So it's not we're going to blame this side or that side. It is very much, I'd
An
say, a
institutional
symptom.
problem.
Yeah, absolutely, and a symptom of British colonialism and
Mm.
anti-blackness, I would say, and not just that, because as we've seen, the Jewish people that came wouldn't have been black, still persecuted against, and legislated against, should I
Mm.
say? So 62, we've got the Commonwealth Immigration Act. You can only come if you have government issued employment vouchers, meaning that if you're coming to work a specific job. So we see at that point the majority of workers coming are working in the NHS, in education, or in like manual services. 1968, that is amended. It's amended in the most disgusting way. It's specifically for Kenyan Asians who are fleeing persecution in Kenya. And in order to stop them coming en masse to England, they passed this law, I think, like very, very quickly, run it through Parliament as quickly as possible with as little backlash as possible, in order to preempt the restrictions of Kenyan Asians. And then in 1971, all those acts are superseded by this big Immigration Act, which further limits people from the colonies and their children. And it kind of reshuffles and rejigs what it means to be a British citizen and be able to claim citizenship rights, which would mean moving to Britain. Um, and so that's kind of the history. I think as we fast forward, it's probably things that people have heard in the news, like, you know, after Britain joined the European Union, we have open borders for European migrants. So that has caused, I guess, a lot of
Hmm.
resentment within some British people. We've now got Brexit, which stopping the free movement of people from 31st of December.
Mm-hmm.
Is that it?
Yep.
Yep. So it's over for us all, not just people that want to come here, but if we want to go to Europe, we will have to, go through the country that we are trying to move to work to live in, to holiday in. We'll have to deal with whatever laws that they have in place for us, as British citizens, that is. Um, we've had the hostile environment, which started in 2012. It kind of came to press and to be a big thing after the Windrush scandal in 2016. But if you read the report, it went back as early as 2006 with people being deported back to the Caribbean. Windrush scandal didn't just affect people from the Caribbean, people from West Africa, and in smaller numbers from Australia and from certain countries in Europe that were outside of the EU also impacted. So as you can see, we've just got like a wealth of laws, and that is me like running through them
Mm.
at like Usain Bolt speed. But you can just see the types of Britain just constantly changing the parameters for who is allowed here, who can claim citizenship, and who has the right to be here. And I don't know so much. Maybe you have an opinion on this, Hannah. If it's the British people putting pressure on the government because they don't like what their society and their street looks like, or it's the British government deciding who they need to work and who they don't want to work here, and then kind of pushing that through the media to then, do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
get support from British people. And I feel like it's a cycle,
Yeah,
but
so this is actually
yeah,
what I wrote my literature review about in my
love it.
dissertation, like this cycle that you speak about. So there's obviously three prongs or whatever you want to call it to it.
Yeah.
Is the press, policy slash politicians, and the public. The three P's, as we can call them.
Hmm.
And I feel like you're right in the sense that they all push on each other, and it does go in a circle, and the circle can go in all of the different directions
Yeah.
because obviously, in my opinion, the Home Office pander to the portion of the electorate that is xenophobic and racist.
Yeah.
But what they maybe fail to see, or they're doing on purpose, who knows, is that you can never please that portion of the electorate. So, for example, if the Home Office does a tweet like, we deported 3 people today, hooray, because they do those types of tweets for some reason. But obviously, they're
They
framing
do.
it as if, like, those people don't deserve to be here. So, if they deport an asylum seeker, they'll say, we were deporting an illegal. Um,
Yeah.
and then there's comments under the Twitter posts, as there always is, the replies, and there's people
Yep.
saying, oh, it's not enough of them, send more back, that kind of thing. So it's like you can never, ever, ever please that portion of the electorate. So why do you even try? Is my
Absolutely.
view on things. And then you also, yeah, again, it's like if they, because like Priti Patel and the Home Office will tweet, we are doing X because we want to honour the will of the British people. So they're referring to, I think a lot of the time they're referring to Brexit because the will of the
Yeah.
British people apparently was to protect Britain's borders with Brexit. So they're saying if we get rid of all these asylum seekers, we are, protecting the will of the British people and enacting the will of the British people. And yeah, it's just a cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. It does seem to be the case, definitely, especially with things like Brexit. And then it's interesting because a lot of people will say, well, we didn't vote for Brexit just because of the borders. I don't know what their arguments are, what they wanted outside of immigration control. But yet you will see the kind of government, and as you said, the Home Office pander into that portion that want border controls and immigration reforms. and so it's kind of difficult to, I guess,
Separate the
pull
two.
out a prong, yeah, from
Yeah.
the
I think
cycle that you
it's
mentioned.
the problem with saying, well, first of all, let's actually just say that I'm sure not everyone who voted for Brexit is racist, because there are some people who are like,
Absolutely.
this will be great for the fishing laws, which I obviously don't know
Yep.
anything about. But they were like, we need to not adhere to the EU's fishing quota, and therefore I want to leave the EU. But I do think that the Vote Leave campaign was the entire campaign was sold on get rid of migrants. That was the entire
Absolutely.
campaign.
Yep.
So that is why it's difficult to separate the two, because the Vote Leave campaign was so strong with this anti-immigrant, anti-migrant rhetoric.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And most people, in the general population, would have said, "Oh yeah, we need British jobs for British
Yeah,
people. Got to get rid of these people that are just stealing our benefits, taking our
yeah.
jobs, taking our houses." Yep, that kind of commentary. It was very clear, I think, during Brexit.
Do you ever
Absolutely.
feel like, do you want to say gaslit? But like people will say, like, that was the rhetoric for the entire Brexit campaign, right? And that's what you were
Yeah,
hearing. And then now people are like, well, not everybody. I mean, I've just said it. What, like, not
yeah,
everybody was racist who voted for Brexit. But I'm like, does nobody remember like what was actually happening
yeah.
at the time?
Absolutely, absolutely. I don't see how I could possibly forget like Nigel Farage with all his nonsense. And then
The bus that
also
was like,
the bus.
we'll spend this on the
The
NHS,
bus.
and then it was like, oh no, we won't. I mean, this is not about migration, but yeah. And then it wouldn't. He had
Yeah,
that billboard, and it had like a picture of people like lining up to cross a border, and he was like, if we
yep,
vote for Brexit, we won't have this. No one will cross our borders, kind of thing.
yep, exactly. That's the thing, and now it's kind of like people are asking for this separation. Oh no, we voted to leave because of X, Y, and Z, not immigration. It's definitely a very, very confusing. It's like, do people think that people don't have a memory? Do like these media outlets think that? Like, do you think we don't remember? Like, it wasn't that long ago. Right. So let's get into the hostile environment a little bit, which, as we mentioned before, started in 2012 with Theresa May as Home Secretary. And I just want to ask you, Hannah, kind of what do you think that means for, I guess, people? Yeah, I feel like you catch the
Everything,
drift.
life.
Yeah, essentially, life, people.
So in my dissertation, I interviewed 3 young people seeking asylum. So
Yeah,
I could tell you about what they feel like the hostile environment or how it impacts on their life, because then it's actual evidence from people's lives. Shall we do that?
yeah, absolutely, definitely.
So I think the biggest reflection, like upon undertaking this research project, for me was that, similar to what we were talking about earlier, is that the sort of complete lack of autonomy that you have when you're being impacted by the hostile environment. Because like when people of the Windrush generation suddenly got a letter from the Home Office that said you don't deserve to be here anymore, and it kind of puts this like suspended sentence over your head, because
Yeah,
from the point that you get that letter until the point where a decision is made of whether you're going to get deported or not, your existence is temporary. Like the whole time you're not allowed to go
yeah,
to work, you can't really participate in any kind of public life. Like if anyone listening has watched, is it called Sitting in Limbo?
yeah, absolutely.
On the BBC, that characterized it really well, in the sense that obviously the main character, he lost like everything. Like he had to sell his house because he couldn't afford, because they used to have obviously 2 wages coming into the house, and then they only
Yeah,
had one, and then he had to live with his kids, and there's all of this stuff that goes on because your life is so temporary and you cannot see into the future at all. Like you just have to take it one day at a time, because tomorrow you could get a letter or a call or whatever from the Home Office, or they'll just come into your house and
yeah.
take you out of your house and put you in a detention centre and say, that's it, you're getting deported.
It's insane.
So, similarly, with people who are seeking asylum, from the minute that they enter the UK until they receive a decision on their application, which can be anything from 6 months to infinity and beyond, it
Yeah,
seems, they yeah, it's this temporary existence. So, and I think it also, like, you're only characterized, like your identity is only as an asylum seeker. Like one of my participants, Melisha, said to me, I feel like being an asylum seeker is a large part of my identity, even though I don't want it to be. Obviously, financially, if you're living as an asylum seeker in the UK, on the Home Office website, it says you get £37.50 a week. I believe it's gone up to like £39 because of the pandemic, but it is not
Yeah.
reflected on the website. So I might need to tell, whoever works in comms in the Home Office to sort that out.
Wow.
So yeah, £37.50 to £39 a week to live off means that a lot of the time you need to choose between like eating or getting transport. So an example of that I can give is Yaman, another one of my participants. He was saying that to get to his local language class so that he can improve his English and have better job prospects, etc.
Yeah.
It's in the nearest city, so it's a 2-hour walk there and back for him
Oh
to
my
do that,
goodness.
because if he pays for the bus fare, then he can't eat that day. So yeah, that's one other thing. And particularly with COVID,
Yeah.
everyone was saying COVID is the great equalizer because it affects everyone, therefore we are all equal. And it's like, no, it actually, if you're already suffering at the hands of the state, you're actually just impacted more.
Yeah, I wasn't. I think I heard it before we'd even learn of the health inequalities with, Black and
Mm,
Asian people dying more. Those rates that wasn't even reported yet, and I was thinking, but wait, if everybody's at home, some people, even on a small level of some people's homes, aren't
no,
a safe space for
exactly.
them. Some people like that. I was just it didn't make any sense, and I was so kind of surprised that that would be the rhetoric and the narrative that you would choose to push at the start of a pandemic that was completely unprecedented. One thing we didn't do,
No,
sorry,
go on.
just to say what is hostile environment,
Oh, that's important.
because just in case you don't know, so it basically, if I'm right, please correct me if I'm wrong because you are the specialist. Um, it basically shifts the burden of proof to the person that was being accused of being illegally in this country to prove that they were here legally, as opposed to the Home Office finding a reason that you were here illegally and proving that you're themselves. So in the show Sitting in Limbo, which talks about I can't remember the
No, I
man's name,
can't.
but he's a Windrush. Um, he's of the Windrush generation, and he's been in this country. I think it was like
It
50
was
years,
it
60
was
years maybe.
honestly like, yeah, over 50 years that he's lived and worked in
Yeah,
this
like he'd come as a
country, and
child.
then they were like,
Yeah.
no, you don't have citizenship, bye.
Absolutely. So you get a letter saying you're an illegal immigrant. You have X amount of days to prove that you're not. Essentially, he didn't have a passport. By the way, you don't need a passport to prove that you're a citizen of this
Mm,
country. The landing cards of this is getting into the Windrush scandal, but just to explain this case, the landing cards of a large proportion of people that had arrived in Britain from the Caribbean were destroyed. They were stored physically, and then apparently the Home Office needed to make room for something else and literally just destroyed them without digitalizing them or anything. And so these people had to then prove it, and they had to literally find
mm.
photographs of themselves as
Like at
children. And
primary
this man, he
school,
was,
yeah.
yeah, like in school, or with having children in this country, at work. Like, who takes photos at work? Like, remember, we're not talking about 2020 where we all have a smartphone and we all take photos every day. Like, I could prove where I was probably every day for the past like 2 3 years. But back in the 1960s, like, that's not a thing. You take a photo on a special occasion. Like, even to find photos of my grandparents of the same generation, it's not something that we could just grab. There are probably about 10 special occasion
Mm,
photographs where they've gotten dressed up and gone to a studio to take a picture to send back home. And funnily enough, my dissertation was, I used a lot of photographs and family archives in order to write my dissertation, and I made the link with the fact that these family archives that we hold and we keep, just to remember our grandparents or our parents, these were lifelines for that
mm.
generation. These pictures, literally, a photograph saved their life because it proved that they were here when they said they were here, and that is absolutely insane to me.
The whole story shows how bureaucratic and just a stupid process that it is, but also how like the goalposts are constantly moving. So as you say, you don't actually have to have a passport in this country to be British. Like you don't have to be in possession of a passport. But then they were like, you don't have that. So okay, that's like one bad mark. You're not good
Yeah,
enough to be here. And then in Sitting in Limbo, again, when he kept going to these like interviews with the Home Office, he'd bring all of this information which he's so painstakingly like gone through his
Oh
entire
yeah.
life, and like any certificate that he had of anything on any photo that he had, he even went and like contacted his old teachers to see if he could like they could give him a reference and say, yes, I definitely taught this person.
Oh
um
my gosh, yeah.
and then you take all that to the Home Office, and again, they'd be like, it's not good enough. So it's just these constantly moving goalposts of what is and what isn't good
Yeah.
enough, and how, how do you prove your own life story? That's crazy.
Exactly, absolutely. Just for context, this man's name is Anthony Bryan, and his case was one of the first cases that got exposed of the Windrush scandal. And it was interesting. I think it was his brother that actually wrote the show.
Yes, it was.
After in the aftermath of it, about Anthony Bryan's life. I guess with the Windrush scandal, it was not their fault. It
Mm.
was a mistake by the Home Office, and it obviously particular targeted black people, um, which then creates a racial element to the issue. And I think it highlights systemic racism within that part of society, if not the wider society.
And also the woman at the Home Office who was like in charge of the compensation scheme recently resigned because she says institutionally racist. So there we go.
I have not actually had one episode where I haven't mentioned the term institutional racism, and I'm just happy that I've managed to get it in this episode. So thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Kudos to me.
I think
Right.
one thing that I want to mention to our audience, which I haven't really
Absolutely.
talked about, I've just talked about people generally being barred from work, but I think it's important to actually talk about it more, because when I was doing my dissertation, I came to the sort of conclusion that we're always told, or we hear in the press or from people in the streets, people who come over here, they're scroungers, they don't benefit our society at
Mm.
all, they're only coming here for benefits, whatever. But the UK government prevents these people from working. So, how
Yep.
are you supposed to prove that you want to be an integral part of society? Or you talked about this a few weeks ago, and it's a horrible thing to say, but to contribute to
Mm.
society, if you're actually not allowed to contribute to society, like you're not even given the option to go and get a job. So it just,
Absolutely.
yeah, it's a really simple thing, but it really blew my mind when I was doing my dissertation. I was like, the
Yeah,
whole
definitely.
narrative is just a lie, because actually people aren't allowed to work. So I don't understand where this narrative of
Yep.
people not contributing has come from, because they're actually not allowed to contribute. Sorry, I just really
Absolutely. And
wanted to
it
say that.
no, that makes sense, and I think it's even more pertinent. And I hope people maybe understand this a little bit more. But being in a pandemic and a lot of people not being able to go to work, because of the places of work have closed, and people being on furlough. I heard a lot of people say, like, I just want to go back to work. Like, I just want to go and work. Mentally, what that does for you to sit in your house every
Mm,
day and not be able to leave, because in the case of the pandemic, nothing is open. But in the case of you not even being able to afford to do anything or go anywhere, and then on top of that, the fear of people, being overtly racist to you in the street, we haven't even
we haven't
touched
even
on the
touched on
violence,
that.
refugees have to deal with, asylum seekers, and just, I guess, black and brown
Mm,
people in general, but especially with the language barrier, and being new to the country or the city. Um, I hope that people maybe during this pandemic have understood what mentally that can do to you as a person and your willpower.
exactly. And I think again it's this thing about temporality, if that's a word, or
Mm,
temporary existence, is a lot of
yep,
us, well, I can only speak for myself, but prior to the pandemic, I'd never had like a circumstance where I couldn't plan my life in advance. But then obviously the
yep,
pandemic came, and it is still here, and we cannot see into the future at all. But imagine that being your existence, and you don't know when there's going to be an end date. You said about not being able to go to work is so important, because it is demoralizing to sit inside your house every day. If you come to the UK as a child, you're as an asylum seeker,
yep.
you are allowed to go to school. Thank goodness. We're doing
Thank
something
goodness.
right. Um,
Wow.
so a lot of the kids will come home and say to their mum and dad, "Oh, everyone else's like mummy and daddy is working. Why aren't you going to work?" And
Yeah,
imagine hearing that as a parent. And obviously, if the kid
absolutely.
came to the UK when they were quite young, they might not have even seeing their parents working like in their home country. So yeah,
Yeah.
I can't imagine how demoralizing it is, especially for your kids to like come home from school and be like, why aren't you going out to work?
Yeah, definitely. Also, just to know, I don't know if anybody is here thinking like, oh yeah, but like Britain has its own problems. It can't deal with all these people coming in. Um, you know, Boris Johnson has just announced that he will be spending 16.5 billion into the military, in the next
16.5
few years.
billion.
Billion into the military. I didn't know that any wars were coming up. I don't believe
Have we
that
scheduled one?
they are.
Is what's
No,
going
no
on?
one mentioned it to me,
I've not heard
so
about, what, yeah.
me either. 16.5 billion. I'm just going to remind you that he also a few weeks ago said that school children will not be getting free school meals in the holidays. Yes, he's now backtracked, but that was his original stance. But 16.5 billion for the military.
I saw
So I'm just leaving that there, just for people that anybody wondering, if the sixth biggest economy in the world can afford to look after people fleeing persecution. Just if you were unsure, that's all. Thank you. Right, so I have a few questions for you, Hannah, just in relation to your work. And then, obviously, as we mentioned, you are volunteering with Mosaic Education at the moment. So, like, what would you like to see? This is probably a massive question. What would you like to see Britain do in regards to refugees in this country? That is refugees, not like immigration more broadly, because I think that's just a lot for today.
I mean, I feel like my answer is going to be kind of in regards to immigration more broadly, but I think
Okay.
there's been like several reports recently about the Home Office and just basically the reports say the Home Office is not fit to function, which is kind of like a big statement. And obviously, I
Yep.
don't work for the Home Office, so I don't know, but I want to see some, like, is anything being done about the fact that it's not fit to
Yeah.
function? Like, what's going on? Again, as I mentioned earlier, the person who was working on the Windrush compensation scheme resigned because she said it's racist. So clearly, there's
Yeah.
a big problem with the Home Office. So I feel like
Definitely.
I'd like to see some sort of overhaul, which involves it not being a race to the bottom in terms of trying to expel people from the United Kingdom, but
Yeah.
actually considers what is best for people. And also, one thing that's really important to point out is a lot of people who are seeking refuge do actually want to go back to their home country, because you know what?
Yeah.
Before the circumstances arose that made them seek refuge, they had a nice life there.
Absolutely. Yep. That literally makes complete sense. I think it is definitely important to remember the fact that different people come for different reasons, and because they come for different reasons, they also might want to go back home for different reasons. There are so many nuances and complexities to the story of immigration, historically and even today in every case, as you've mentioned. And I think it's really good, and I guess we're kind of similar in our research, which we just did discuss like while we were doing our masters. We both use like people's testimonies and
Mm,
stories to create our research and base it around people's individual stories, as opposed to these like statistics and figures of like when you say like, oh, I don't know, like 3,000 people came here in 1929, like what does that mean for anybody? Like each one of those people had a story, had a family, had a profession. And yeah, I do like the fact that you've been able to kind of understand and to dig into people's narratives to help you understand that and help others understand that. Definitely. Also, going back to
also,
Mosaic, since it is nearly Christmas time, I think Christmas is like coming earlier this year because there's not really much else to think about. But yeah, so with Mosaic, and your kind of work with them, volunteering there, what have they got on offer for us this Christmas that can help support a charity that is clearly doing the work that needs to be done?
well, Deanna, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure that you've seen on social media that there's a big push for people to shop small and independently and basically from small businesses this year, because
Yeah.
people are struggling. As I've said, it's a pandemic and people are struggling financially, especially people who are owners of their own business or self-employed, because sort of the rules about furlough and the kind of financial backing they get from the government is either different or it's just not there. And obviously it's nice if people support charities, because charities are also not getting as much funds, is that
Yeah.
English, as many funds,
Mm.
they're not getting as much financial backing from people, individuals, because obviously people need to be more tight on money. So in the spirit of supporting both small businesses and in my opinion, a great cause, Mosaic have set up this Mosaic Christmas shop where you can buy Christmas presents from 17 small businesses,
Love that.
and at least 10% of the profit goes to Mosaic. So each business owner has decided how much of the profit they will donate, obviously based on their own
Yeah.
financial circumstances.
Yeah.
But yeah, at least 10% from every single item in the shop goes to Mosaic. And I just think it's really good and I'm really excited about it.
Sounds good. I've had a look at some of the things on offer. I would say my favourites are definitely the tea, and the candle. And there's also a
The candle
nice,
looks
yeah,
sick.
it just looks like it's gonna smell like so warm. Is there anything you'd recommend on the shop that you got your eye on, or?
I've bought those Turkish socks,
Okay.
which are basically like knitted
Yeah.
socks, and every single pair is different, which is
Oh
what I
wow.
quite like
Yeah.
about them. So they'll all be like different colours, different designs, kind of
Love
thing.
that.
Um, Also got my eye on the candle
Mm.
and the tea. There's candlestick holders, and the person who made them especially for
Oh,
Mosaic.
that's
So
beautiful.
there's a collection of 15.
Yeah.
So once the 15 are gone, they are literally
Oh
gone.
wow.
So I would say people should go for those
Definitely.
if that's what they want.
Yeah,
But it's
definitely. I
great.
think it's a great initiative, especially as you said, there is definitely a need, I think this year more than any, to support local business. It's also better for the environment for the most part than doing all your shopping on Mr. Bezos's site. And
That guy, Jeff.
yeah,
Oh.
man like Jeff. And also at the end of the day, it's November the 20th now. If you get your act together, you won't have to rely on next day delivery. Um,
Mm-hmm.
don't do your Christmas shopping the night before or the week before.
Please
Do it with
no.
time. You could probably get better things, because you won't be rushed for what can get delivered in time. And with that, support a charity and support small businesses because they desperately need it this year. Yeah,
And on the sustainability angle, everything is like handmade and handmade in the UK,
absolutely
so
perfect.
it's not being shipped from anywhere
Yeah,
else. And yeah, a lot of people are doing like kind of zero waste production,
definitely.
which is
That's
great.
well, literally, it's exactly what we need in 2020. I think that is everything that we intended to cover today. I just want to say a humongously large thank you to Hannah Gaffey for being the first guest on the History Hotline, for joining me, for explaining her research. And I feel like whenever I speak to Hannah, I feel like I've put the world to right. I feel like I come out of conversations having learned something, and just feeling, I think the passion of Hannah rubs off on me. So thank you, Hannah, for joining us here today. It's been my pleasure to have you. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you for giving up your time to talk about Mosaic and all things charity and immigration. Thank you.
I don't think I can follow that.
You don't have to.
I'm literally sat here like, oh.
No, honestly, it's literally my pleasure. So thank you so much for being here. And I think that is the end of the episode. So anybody that is new here, thank you, and I hope you've enjoyed your first episode. Please, if you can, follow us on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts, and please leave us a review on Apple. It really helps us to get recognised and noticed in the search bars, and your positive reviews and comments also allow us to kind of rank on the Apple podcasting charts. We're very, 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 very far at the bottom because we're a new podcast. We don't have the numbers yet, but one day I hope we will. And so if you can support us in that way, please do follow us on Twitter, on Instagram, and yeah, stay tuned for the next episode, which will be out next week Monday. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful day.
Bye.
Bye.